And good afternoon, everyone. We have now come to the end of 2 days conference on Tibet-Mongol Relation Conference, Prospects and Challenges in Tibet-Mongol Relations since the 20th century and the path forward. It is an honor for me to host this concluding session. I am Dechin Palmo, and on behalf of Tibet Policy Institute, Dilip Hudutu Foundation, and Tibet Culture and Information Center, Moscow, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude to all the speakers, panelists, and participants for making this conference a great success. Now, without taking much time, I would like to request Telo Turgurumbuche to deliver a concluding remark.
Respected Hong Sigyong Masrela, Director of Tibet Policy Institute, Tawatsiringla, dear delegates from Mongolia as well as the Tibetan side, as we come to a concluding session of the 2 days conference that is held for the first time, in particularly on the subject or matter of Mongol-Tibet relations, focusing on the 20th century. I'm very happy to say that there has been wonderful presentations from both sides, very interesting historical facts. At the same time, it is eye-opening experience for all of us to learn that there is many areas that we still need to fill the gap and do further research and investigation on each other's historical facts. There's a lot of information that the Tibetan side has given presentations, which was also very eye-opening for the Mongolian scholars as well. It has created a curiosity. And when you hold such conferences, having curiosity is always a good sign. That means there's room and opportunities to collaborate and work together and to find ways to fill in those historical gaps. At the same time, we've come to learn that even though we could be talking about the same subject or the same person or the same matters, but nevertheless, we have slightly different pronunciations. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean that our historical facts or writings are completely opposite. I think this has enriched in terms of literacy, in terms of historical facts, political historical facts, and also in terms of literacy and culture and religion as well. I truly believe that this 2 days conference was a success. And at the same time, I truly believe that this is not going to be the last conference that we hold. Of course, we welcome all sides, all scholars from both sides, from Mongolian side and the Tibetan side, open each other's arms for further collaboration and further research. We didn't have much time to share our opinions or suggestions, but here I want to take this opportunity to make a recommendation. The recommendation that I mentioned to the Deputy Director of TPI on one of our occasions during our breaks is for the TPI to formulate a small research team. It doesn't have to consist of many scholars, but at least if it could consist of at least 3 scholars that will focus on Tibet-Mongolia's relations. And after compiling a small group, to bring them to Mongolia and spend at least a month to go through Mongolian historical archives about the earliest 20th century. I think there were some documents that we came across, but not in detail. Of course, some of them were in Mongolian, but some of the political historical facts that none of us were aware of, and this is some of the information that I'm coming across for the first time. I'm sure these documents are not preserved in exile. They probably have been destroyed during China's occupation or invasion. And I'm sure that if there is any document in existence, I'm sure that we do not have access to those materials. So I think this is really definitely an eye-opening gathering for many of the scholars, as well as the students who have joined here, and I'm sure that this will be areas for you to focus in the future. I openly criticize with the purest and the right intentions. My motivation is always pure, with strengthening our historical relations, not just based on historical facts, but also there's a lot of areas that we really need to work in the future as well. We definitely need to strengthen our ties. And I have publicly mentioned over and over again, numerous times, and I mentioned it during the opening session, that one of the Tibet's longest allies, foreign allies, happens to be Mongolia. And due to circumstances, we lost our relationship. But nevertheless, since the early 90s, we have been able to reestablish these historical relationships. As I mentioned at the opening ceremony, unfortunately, we had to reestablish our historical ties in exile, not in Tibet. That is the sad part. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean that there's not no room for growth. Definitely, we will grow stronger together as nations, as communities, as institutions, as scholars. So therefore, as a Mongolian myself, taking the Mongolian side of the scholars, and I take this opportunity to speak on behalf of the delegation, I want to extend an open arm to all the Tibetans in whatever field you are working in, whether it's politics, whether it's economy, whether it's health, whether it's history, or even medicine and astrology. The doors is always open. And as I told you very before, as a representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I am based in Mongolia for the time being, and I will be the bridge to make ways for us to strengthen our relationship in the future. Also, as a Tibetan bureaucrat, I also want to extend our open arms to Mongolian scholars, and as well as not only pilgrims, but not only Buddhists, but also in every field, all the specialists to come to India. I'm very proudly like to say, after this event is over, I'm staying behind for a few days, and I'll be receiving another 70 plus Mongolians. This is the 5th group that I'm leading within 2 years since I moved to Mongolia, a wonderful program which is called Mind Reflection Program, which is basically an introduction to Buddhism, as well as a detailed introduction to the Central Tibetan Administration and the Tibetans in exile. This program has been very wonderful. It's very demandful, and therefore we have a very long list of people who want to participate in this program. I remember 2 years ago when we first started this program, we had a little bit about 47 people that joined the program. And each time that we led this group, the number has increased over and over again. The first time was 47, the second group was 50 plus, the third one was also 50 plus, the fourth one that I led was 80 plus, and right now it's going to be 70 plus. Of course, I can do more people at one time because I have the experience of leading large groups from Russia and also in Mongolia. But the only problem is that Meglodganj being such a small town and of high quality accommodation and places to eat as well as driving the small roads makes it a big issue for us to lead a group larger than 80 people. But nevertheless, this is the fifth group that we are leading. And of course, later on, either October, November, will be the sixth group. So this program has been wonderful in deepening the understanding and strengthening our historical ties. And I see a very bright future in our collaboration. I think now amongst the general public, we have set a very good foundation. And here with today's conference, I truly believe that we set a very good foundation for the scholars in the field of history, literacy, and so on. So I truly believe that this will lead to many wonderful opportunities in the future. So without further delay, I want to thank the Central Tibetan Administration, in particularly, the Tibet Policy Institute, for working with us. I know there has been many challenges on your side, but nevertheless, we made it through. We made it through. There's still some issues that we need to, handle, but that's something very minor, and this is something that we will work through and handle everything. But nevertheless, I truly hope that our scholars who are visiting here, mostly for the first time in Dharamsala, had a wonderful time, and I truly hope that this was an eye-opening for all of you. As you can see, how when His Holiness the Dalai Lama, followed by thousands of Tibetans, came into exile, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama's vision to establish and re-establish many of the well-known institutions that existed in Tibet has been re-established here in India, in particularly the monastic institutions. And not only that, for His Holiness's long-term vision for the preservation of this rich heritage. Also in Mongolia, as I think in today's morning presentation, if I'm not mistaken, I think both Bad Bayer and Bad Erdwe had mentioned, no matter how many years Mongolia suffered under communism, to this day, the Tibetan culture, language, literacy is still preserved to a certain extent. So that shows how rich, how the connection is beyond just politics and religion. It's really deeply rooted. And just like His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, that the Mongol people and the Tibetan people are like twin brother and sisters. And based on that, I think that's a wonderful statement that His Holiness has mentioned. And I think today's conference definitely transformed and convinced us to believe that how truly close the Tibetan and Mongolian people are. So with this note, I want to once again express my gratitude towards His Holiness the Dalai Lama for his continuous support for all Mongolian people, not only in Mongolia, but also to all the other Mongolian nationalities, such as Kalmyks, Buryats, Tuvas, and also Inner Mongolians. And I think today, I think one of the Tibetan scholars mentioned in their books, they said, Tösok and Mesok. I kind of like that term, which is like lower, lower Mongolia, which kind of refers to Inner Mongolia, and Upper Mongolia, which kind of refers to Mongolia. So I think that's a very interesting term that's being used in some of the literatures. So based on that, I think there's still many areas to focus and work on, and I look forward to being the bridge between these two wonderful people, a nation, and cultures. And regardless, even if my term finishes as a representative, my karma is dedicated to both Tibetan and the Mongolian people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Delator Gurumbuche, for your concluding remark. Now I request Ko Dawat Singh to deliver a concluding remark. Pikisuji Yamshi Khan Gigenzi, Dawat Singh Chone Sungshina.
Sejong Tang, then Nangshinki, Tata Chushu Saman, Trash Delishia, and Tiringato Tond in Jujuare, Jujuate, Tond in Jujuare, Onjong, Maumba Gambate, Antambo Potare, Nato, Sopok, the Kawanta, Sopok, and the Taka Yoning at the Bejonki, Leon, Sijin Shukutanyando, then the Dolinchia, Teyan, a Cholut and the Kwana member, Debu Logitula, Nato Tumungi, Leon, Tumungi, and Karichon Yoba. Those told Chikarisoro, woman in Chunika Kangatan, we chassis netan to so tuni, Kambapo Matawa, the Tari, Kambaten Tombo Potoya. The young as a soon to Jujuare, don't you Java Sawachi, Tokasawachi, Pachi, Gotua in Bachi Munzi, Zamble to Teva and Shigre, Zamble to Karichados and Miri Mambo, Chulu Mambo, the woman and the chassis that do down to Tuni, Chopa Mambo, don't you Tata Man Drogin, Carrier de Dusena. Chulu tang, Rishong tang, Miri tang, to so Lishon, then that Jusunon, Zamlek Jusunon, Trupo Shu, Chat de Dua. Then took chat de one Nang, Jusuk den on drill, Jets and Mundusiam, to so long, Chandang at Sopo town, Papanin, Tomomai Bakchi, or take a Peju Nature. The Peju Natures and Peju send it, Penpa Jun, Searma to Pepe Chipore, Seyo Mare, Kundu Kaduna, Panalinda and Cheyon Bas and Jagan Cheyon, Dejo. The Pepe June is Hopo Chawara Tejon, then Peju, Nanchu de Pebeke, and the Juno Chirella, Sobok Juno Chirete, Chicho, and Tejo Caton, not to Drolen on a mambo song, so they pay down to so the Sopo Gay, no Juya to so to Carichon, Kundu Moma Carlote Mambo Nola, or the Gay down to so some at the pay tal Yamagawach, and Soket will take up a jungle say there. Then Nanjing Logitol and to Shigre Caton de Sopo Jabo Antambo Tanganala. Don't do a gay Ramada Yoda, then Nanjing pen and Juga Cosan turn back desire pentag, gay and Zuni can't contact Sopo Ram gay to Roy and Betchen chair, Sopo Ram gay to Rotoina, that is Sopo Rishon Chandler, Sopo Juno Chandler. They don't take Maumba, not so Debu Logitolang, a cat to the city on Nahi, not to Lewan the Tumu, Chipa Leon Mambo Giorella, that not to Lewan to go outside Maumba. Nato Zamling Jusuno Negood, young Nato Soso Jita, Junsun Satikari, Nato Yoba Chu del Yabo Rishon del Yoda, Nato Tumuma, but Chechu Chore. Then Zamblin took Netan Caniton Tewaina, keeping Chipo Seame, Nato de Kundun Gomba Nanjing, Zamblin, Jul Paintoya, down Draw Mill Paintoya. To so tola Nato Chulu, Nato Rishon de Tumuma, but Chechu and Nuba Yoba Nideva. Tuso tola, Nato Sobo in the Papa in the Nato Maumpa, draw mill, caripin to told, this so down. Then they made Tony Shiava in Nato Soso Mirik, Chechu, Soso Mirik, the Sunjo, down to the chair tola, young Nato Tumuma in Bak Chu, and Rishon Tig, Sobo, Papa, counting woman, shoot there on here, Peju Nanchu, Tebaje, Peju Nanchu, Rishon, dead, Papa, so Papa and dead Yure, Peju Nanchu, and children Rishon, dead, Sobo, Sobo and dead Yure. Maoba Nasu Mitu Dea and Telishane, Nasu Mirinkate, Yajin Roa Town, Jutsu no Shashu Dutoya. To so Samate, Nato del Kamba Tamboch Poare, Tejon, Nato del Maoba Mitu, Rumbochi Song, the nine between Chia Greva Jago, then Nanshin Tari Naso, Tond Tola, Kawan Samale, the Samag, Shinjuchia, Songshana and Zanjuma, Shinjuchi, Jesam Truton and Lesha. Jezang to song Atu Lehong, the Maumba Chatoma, Babne, the name part, so down, double Patang Yungi, down in Tekan, then Casa, then the Lampat Pen Jezang to know the Ching down, Casa down, Zojuja and Trio and to Naruche, then I Jezang down in the Reva of a part on to Soyo and Naruche, the Richia and the name I took the Sijin Yashukon main to the Natuk the Sijin Yashukon main down, the Ming I took the John the Zojan that was Tamang maintained conduct, Ted Patrin chair, patent the Tintin chair, in Patrin chair, dig Tony, then I took share the chair, there was a lodge to Yato, me Mabochi, dating junior, next to some good Suya town, Nato Mamba Kamba, Nipa Poya Leon, 이스팅 타포스 조토야 던르 레와 자도 대경 다리기 총도 간라 되니 참아요마기 쇼지 땡사보 어자 첨보 던르 제상 장지 주셔 순주바 참아요 gemba tang tang mambo shu chi pesong to so chama de nga su ji nyang shu khon la yang thong sha de war de yong ning ta ban tu ji chi ya yin tin ta ga rang to chen na
Now, I would like to request our chief guest, Honorable Sikyong Pemba Srina, to give a special address. Kundin so benen Sikyong Bongo Sikyong Chone ni kalop sung shi nangyu.
sure
At the outset, I want to thank the organizers, the Tibet Policy Institute, based here in Dharamsala, and Diluf Hutukto Foundation from Mongolia for organizing this history conference. And I think it's a privilege for us to be able to receive so many scholars and former senior diplomats from Mongolia, not just from the academic field, but also from the diplomatic field, which you know much more than, since your postings in different countries, you have much more exposure to how others view you with your neighboring countries. And I'm not a historian. I was supposed to come yesterday for the opening, for the inaugural session of this conference. But since I'm not a historian, I thought it's better that I come at the concluding session. We have very good representation from here, from the Tibetan side, in the form of Professor Chamba Samde and Kishi Rongbo Losangendala and Kishi Tsurim Yazula and Kembo Chikyumedojila and Yantala representing the Tibetan side. And it's a galaxy of scholars from your side, from Mongolia. And I'm sure you must have had a very constructive discussion. Since yesterday and today's conference is focused on 20th century, particularly relations between Mongolia and Tibet. I believe that there is a lot more that we can go back in time about relations between Mongolia and Tibet. There are Chinese claims and counterclaims on territories which have to be decided by or has to be referred to history of the past. Maybe I can share this with you. Most of the Tibetans know about our position. Since we came into the government in 2021, we do follow the policy, the middle way policy, which is a Buddhist concept, as we all know, espoused by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, supported by majority of the Tibetans through a public opinion and unanimously decided by the Tibetan Parliament in exile. We are committed to following the middle way policy. Middle way, as you know, is a Buddhist concept, avoiding extreme polarities. And in this case, the polarities are the historical status of Tibet as an independent state, and the other polarity is the present situation of Tibet under the repressive communist government. So we have to find a middle way there, which is a form of autonomy to whatever degree it comes to that. But even though we follow the same policy, the middle way policy, trying to seek a non-violent, negotiated, mutually beneficial and lasting solution to the Sino-Tibet conflict, we have decided to change our strategy a little bit by focusing on the historical status of Tibet. It's not just talking the talk, but we have been working with the US Congress over the last 1.5 years to see some action on the US side, particularly in countering China's misinformation on the history of Tibet or the historical narrative of China on Tibet. So right now, bill is very much there in the Congress that has been approved in the House with a supermajority of 393 members supporting the bill. And I'm also leaving in a few days to US to push it in the Senate. So once that is done, then this will create more space for us to work internationally with other governments to see whether we can persuade them to do the same thing. So when I talk about the change in strategy by focusing on history, even while pursuing the middle way policy, one of the reasons is that we should send a clear message to China that China just cannot change history by themselves. And they're very good at doing that in the whole region, including the last reported news reports about China again naming another 30 different places in Arunachal Pradesh in Chinese, claiming that part to be China's. So we have managed to push this in the US Congress, and if that gets passed in the Senate and with the presidential accent, then we will be moving on with other countries to work on similar lines. The message to China and then also to the international community that they just cannot repeat like a parrot what Chinese government wants them to say, that Tibet is part of PRC, or rather Chinese government always saying that Tibet has been part of China since antiquity or time immemorial. We don't know when time immemorial is or antiquity is. So, and the third reason for drawing to this course is also to send a message to the Tibetans themselves. If Tibetans don't study Tibetan history, then who else will? Then the fourth reason is we have both independence advocates and also middle way advocates. And for both of them, even for independence advocates to seek independence for future, they will have to prove independent status of Tibet in the past. And we follow this as middle way. We follow this strategy to focus on the historical status to lend credence to the middle way policy. And there's no reason why we should be arguing with each other. We should be focusing rather more on how to handle China than discussing amongst ourselves about the merits and demerits of both the courses. So that is the change in strategy that we have adopted, and we believe that it's yielding its results. Now, as an outcome of this conference, one thing that I would suggest is, since all the scholars are here from Mongolia and from the Tibetan side, if there could be a smaller group of historians who will not just discuss about the Tibet-Mongolia relation in the 20th century, but go back in time and write a book on specifically on Mongol-Tibet relationship. Because this is something that I've advised the Britishers also to do. Last time when I was in UK, in London, I met a group of scholars from several universities, and one of the things they suggested was to write a historical about UK-Tibet relationship, because it's not in the minds of many people, particularly in this modern day when people are preoccupied with so many things. They don't understand the essence of these historical facts. So to remind the British politicians and the people as to how British India or Britishers used to view Tibet, and coining those terms, suzerainty and all that, which has become archaic now. If every country that has relation with Tibet established its own historical facts, that would also be in addition to what has already been done. So I think those will be useful to use as an argument to the politicians and to the public in that particular country to view Tibet from a different perspective. Because there are so many historicals which covers the whole length and breadth of Tibetan history, but covering one specific relation, one country's specific relation with Tibet from their perspective as to how they saw Tibet at those two times, So those, I think, will be useful. And Tibet-Mongol relation is very, very old. sometimes, you know, some of our Mongol friends used to tell us, you turned us into Buddhists, otherwise we were warriors of Genghis Khan people, you know. So, but those are part of our history. And today we are where we are. Now we have to make optimum use of countering China's false narrative on not just Tibetan history, but I think histories of the neighboring countries around China. Those will be, I think, useful in persuading other governments, because this is ultimately we have to persuade governments to take certain position on Mongolia or Tibet historically. And if you look from that perspective, then I think relations between two countries, another country with Tibet, from different perspectives would be very, very useful as a tool in convincing other governments as to what position they need to take looking at the reality. So other than that, I have nothing much to add. In fact, since we came into the government, we have started focusing on the historical status, and this is one of the initiatives that Dao Tsering talked about as the director of Tibet Policy Institute. And if there are opportunities to work with scholars from other neighboring countries, just like we are working with you now, we will definitely take those opportunities, including Japan, and other countries. Whether the relationship with Tibet was very brief or very deep or whatever sense, those days how Tibet was viewed by its neighboring countries is going to be very, very useful. And Michael Van Walt has done his work in the Tibet Brief 2020. He worked with some 100 scholars over 8 years to get that book done. And Michael Van Walt, Van Prague, he was a friend of Tibet for many years. I think he was maybe a young boy when His Holiness visited Europe for the first time in 1973, and then he studied international law. He worked on for many years, including research on the legal status of Tibet, following the International Commission of Jurists report on Tibet. So those have been useful materials, and he has been, his last assignment was in Stanford. So he has come out with this book, which should be considered critical. Chinese government has not responded to his argument on Tibetan history that Tibet was never considered part of China, even during the Yuan or the Ming or the Qings, or even as per international law today. And if you find the time, maybe we'll also come out with the English version of Professor Lau Hangchen, or Lau Hangxiang, who is based in San Diego. He has also written a book based on the imperial historical records. He took it out of the Communist Party website, so they can't blame him for anything. All those documents were available in the Communist Party website, and he downloaded all those documents from the Yuan period to the Ming period, to the Qing period, and he establishes the fact that imperial China, if we can consider the Mongols and the Manchus also as Chinese, then imperial China has never considered Tibet as part of China. And he used to be intrigued by this question as to, when he was younger, he used to be intrigued by this question as to why Chinese government is asking every other government to say Tibet is part of PRC or China. If Tibet had been already part of China, then why is Chinese government asking everybody else to say that? That prompted him to do the research and came out with this book. And once the English version is out, we can send you a copy of his argument as to how imperial China has not considered Tibet as part of China. So those are useful materials. And I also refer to these books because these are some of the most recent books on Tibetan history. And you have now a lot more unclassified, declassified documents which you can refer to, which earlier historians didn't have access to. So those are also, I think, useful inputs. And if we manage to push the historical narrative, this will be a huge offensive against China, because for the Chinese government, sovereignty is the main thing. And that's why we also keep telling governments, one thing is that if you keep repeating the statement that Tibet is part of PRC, then you are going against international law. Whether it happened to Tibet more than 70 years ago, or it's happening to Ukraine today, it's the same international law that governs us, all of us. And the second point we make is, on the one hand, they keep saying Tibet is part of PRC. On the other hand, the countries keep saying that we support negotiations between Representative of His Holiness Dalai Lama and the Chinese government. So we tell these governments, these two don't go together, because China rules Tibet with an iron hand, and the whole international keeps repeating the statement that Chinese government wants them to make like a parrot, that Tibet is part of PRC. Then where is the reason for China to come and talk to us? When we say middle way, and we talk about the polarities, which I mentioned before, then if you remove one polarity, then where's the middle way? There's no middle way. So that's what we try to tell these governments. And the third thing is, we tell them, why is Chinese government asking every other government to say Tibet is part of PRC, not other nationalities? That is because the Chinese government knows that they have no legitimacy of their rule in Tibet. And they are trying to seek that legitimacy from the international community. Now, who's the international community to decide for Tibet without even having read Tibetan history? That's why we go these two books and tell them to read history, and then come out with a statement. So this is our position, and this is how we reach out to governments and try to convince them about our strategy as to, for the purpose of gaining leverage on the middle way policy. So thank you very much for your input, and I would really appreciate if you can form a group. Of course, Dao Sering mentioned about compilation of all the presentations that were done yesterday and today. That's one thing. But then if we can look at the whole gamut of history between Tibet and Mongolia, written by Tibetan and Mongolian scholars, I think that will also carry a lot of credence in telling the world as to how we, as people from today, perceive our history, which is very different from how China portrays that to be, and also help in countering China's false narrative on Tibetan history or Mongolian history, for that matter. Even now, when the international community asks China, they always cite saying, nobody recognizes, nobody in the international community recognizes Tibetan government in exile or Tibetan history. So that is how they try to prove their legitimacy. Now, our work is how do we counter that, to put the right perspective of the Tibetan history in front of the world. And that is what we are trying to do, and this conference is an effort towards that end. And this is, of course, there have been many conferences before. Even when Lodi Geri was there, we discussed about such conferences to be organized in Mongolia those days, but I don't know whether it happened or not. But those are steps that we will be working on with Mongolia, with other countries with whom we had relations, even with Indians. When I go around speaking to universities in India these days, they don't know that the first king of Tibet came from India. Very, very basic information. So when we speak about this, then there's a natural tendency, emotional bonding between the Tibetans and the Indians. The Tibetan language having come from India, the Tibetan religion having come from India. So all these, we consider ourselves as an extension of the rich, one part of ancient Indian wisdom. So those things are very, very essential to tell the public. I would also encourage Tibetan scholars to work with Indian scholars to at least come out with a brief outline of our relationship with India, because there are hardly any books on India-Tibet relations. So those, I think, historical narratives would be useful based on facts, based on what had happened in reality, not what Chinese government wants everyone else to believe. So thank you very much for your presence, your excellencies. With your very vast experience, I'm sure the gathering here would have gained a lot. And if there are opportunities for our scholars to go to Mongolia and work with you, that would also be appreciated. We will support such initiatives. But this one request to form a group, I hope Professor Champa someday can lead such a group to write history. Just focus on Mongolia-Tibet relation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Konsigyo. Now I would like to request Ko Temba Gyatsala to deliver his vote of thanks.
Very good evening again. As our director, Kumutawatsina, said, this is end of a conference, but just the beginning of a new relationship that where we would move forward with scholarly exchange. And so that such an exchange, as our Honorable Sijun stated, that if we scholars can come together, we can counter the Chinese narratives, where we can hold on to our history, and we strengthen our history, and then have our history on the global stage, which is something that both Tibetans and Mongolians definitely need. And as Telo Rinpoche stated, that we have a long connection between two nations, two cultures, two wonderful people. Absolutely, we have a very, very long history, a history that is bounded by culture, politics, religion, so something that could definitely move forward. Now, as a word of thanks, I would really want to thank our Honorable Sikkyung, despite being very busy, despite having a very long parliament session, is here with us. And thank you very much, Your Honorable Sikkyung, to be here and give us some very, very important insight, and also some very, very important direction where we need to move forward, what we need to do in the future. We will definitely take those things note down those directives that we, if we could. And then we want to thank Telo Rinpoche, the representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Russia and Mongolia, for bringing, who's the brain behind this very conference, and who has worked on this for many years, as Rinpoche stated, and bringing some very, very prominent scholars and former ambassadors here to engage with Tibetan scholars. Thank you very much, Rinpoche. And then, of course, our director, Kumadawa Tsinila, who always had this strong inclination towards history. And Kumadawa Tsinila really wanted to have this conference collaborate with Rinpoche. So thank you very much, Kumadawa Tsinila. And of course, most importantly, I want to thank Mongolian scholars, despite being from very far, being here. Thank you very much for coming and sharing with us some very, very important insights. And then, of course, I want to thank Tibetan scholars who also have traveled from different parts of India. Thank you very much for coming here. Then I want to thank Telohotu Foundation and the Deputy Director who is here, also here, for being the primary financial, who bears the primary financial expense of this conference. So thank you very much. And of course, I want to thank students from Sara College for Higher Tibetan Studies who have been here for 2 days, because this is a historical conference that deals with history, and you are here for 2 days, traveling, coming every morning from Sara here and then going back. Thank you very much. I'm sure you have learned something, and we are also very happy that you are here. Thank you very much for coming. And then we want to thank journalists who are here, and also many journalists who were there yesterday. Thank you very much for coming. And of course, Tibettv have been here for 2 days. And this, what we have been discussed here, which would be telecast on Tibettv tomorrow onwards, session by session. So I want to thank Tibettv for being here. And then, of course, I want to thank my colleagues, without whom nothing would be possible. So I want to thank all the researchers and staff of Tibet Policy Institute. Most importantly, I want to thank all the participants. I could see most of you have been here for both 2 days. Thank you very much for being here. And finally, I want to thank our Honorable Sichung once again for being here. Thank you very much, Kungola.
Thank you.
For coming here, and then organizers, participants. And before we request our Honorable Sichung to offer kada to all the scholars and speakers, and after that we take a group picture. Before that, our Mongolian delegates led by Professor Basai Khan Oknoi to present books to our Honorable Sichung. Yes.
I'll have to spend months to read, right? Yeah. Thanks so much.
Now I request all the Mongolian scholars to come one by one, where we will offer kada as a gratitude for being here. Also the two, Aruzana and Sendayu also, please. Now I request Tibetan scholars led by Kungma show something. Gishila, Feruna. Gishila, Feruna. Mintala.
어디 장만 키고 내야 네 장만 키고